today we'll flip through my whole 2022 reading journal together and have a chat about using this journal and some books I've read towards the end of the year. I thought we would start with the flip through part and then talk about the newer books in the end when we get to the pages I've recently set up. So this was my first ever reading journal and I feel like I've learned so much throughout this year. I set this journal in January and right at the start we have this page with all the book covers I ended up reading this year. So my reading goal was 24 books, which means 2 books per month. I didn't quite reach that goal unfortunately, but I got pretty close with 20 to 21-ish books. To be honest, I'm not even remotely sad about that because this is still much more than I've read probably since I was in middle school, and I definitely think that having this journal and sharing it with you guys throughout this year helped so much to keep my reading motivation up. I loved the whole book cover approach in this spread, though it was a bit tedious to print these out. However, my tip for this is that I always printed a lot of covers at once, pretty much from all the books in my to be read list, and then I stored them in the back pocket of my journal, so I always had my small cover pictures ready to go when I needed them. My TBR list changed quite a lot on the way, and something I've learned about myself this year is that I need to be able to change things up to keep up my reading motivation. I mostly like to read romance books with some fantasy or sci-fi, but if I read too many of them in a row, I start to get bored with that genre very easily, especially because I think this is a category with some hit and misses in terms of the writing quality. So in between, I read quite a few murder mysteries this year and even some pure fantasy or sci-fi that I really enjoyed. I also didn't have the best luck with longer series this year, and I think next year I'll definitely look more into standalone books and duologies, which I think is probably my sweet spot at the moment. Then one of my favorite spreads was this recommendations list, which is mostly your guys' recommendations. Actually, almost all the books I read this year were from your recommendations, and I'm so grateful that you've introduced me to some incredible new authors and worlds. The community aspect of the reading journal has been my favorite thing about it by far. I've been so excited to share my reading journey with you and especially read your comments on these videos. If you'd be interested in more up-to-date list of everything I've been recommended, you can check out my account on Goodreads. Since I set up that account, I've moved most of my recommendations and TBR lists there. And I also update the books I'm currently reading and try to write some short reviews of all the books I read pretty soon after finishing them. But anyway, next we have a spread that I didn't use quite as much, so the idea was to list all the books that came out this year, and I liked the idea itself, but here I left room for the book cover images as well, which sometimes come out quite late to new books, so I often just didn't end up printing them out here. Something I've also decided is to only start reading series that have been finished from now on, because I have a really hard time remembering what happened in a book I've read 1 or 2 years ago, and then I just never end up picking them up again. Of course, there are a few exceptions, but in general, this is another thing I want to pay more attention to next year. Then, unfortunately, a spread that I didn't end up using was this writing spread. So one of my goals this year was to get back to writing, and I kind of did a little bit, but then I ended up being just so busy with everything else that this was kind of pushed to the side. So better luck next year, I hope. However, I think I'll probably keep my writing stuff separate from the reading journal from now on, because I don't know if I like the idea of mixing the two after all. But then we are finally getting to the actual book spreads here, and we'll also speed things up a little bit. So I've seen many people on YouTube setting up a cover for each month in their reading journals, but I honestly don't read enough books to do that. So instead, I went for this quarterly approach, which has worked for me very well. I did a video of each quarter this year, and I'll leave that playlist to the description if you want to check them out. I also talked about all the books I've read in those videos. When it comes to the style of the reading journal, you'll probably notice that we have a very vintage scrapbooky style here. I've been so excited to use all my stickers and washi tapes in this journal, and it's also kept it much faster to set up the pages. All the pictures you're seeing here, I just downloaded from the internet and printed them for my own use. And I must say that as much as I love my regular bullet journal, there definitely is something so relaxing in just cutting and gluing decorations instead of drawing or painting everything yourself. And that relaxing feeling was something I really wanted for this reading journal. It's been so enjoyable and low-key hobby for me this year. I've decided to take minimal pressure on this journal, and there were some months that I didn't even open this up or read anything if I was busy with something else. But I think that's okay, and the journal still kept me coming back time and time again, so I could avoid all bigger reading slumps this year. Then some of you always want to know what I write in this journal, and it's pretty much just my thoughts about the books. I write about stuff I liked. I also often analyze the writing style a little bit, and I'm always looking for writers whose style I really enjoy. I also try to leave some helpful points of what type of person I would recommend the book to, or write about something that maybe bothered me about the plot or a character. And how this actually works in my life is that I usually write some quick notes on my phone while I read, and then try to combine all the notes into something a bit more cohesive when I write them in this journal. But that's probably mostly because I post pictures of these pages for all of you to see, and I want you to be able to make at least some sense of the writing if you want to read it. Then when it comes to my favorite book this year, it's so difficult for me to choose a winner. My only 10 out of 10 book was the latest murder mystery in the Cormoran Strike series, but I also read other amazing books this year. Some that really stuck with me were the 5th season, Across a Moonlit Sea, Annihilation, and the 6 of Crows that I'm currently reading, which I can already tell will be one of my new favorites. But we'll talk about this later in my next year's reading journal videos. But now we're finally coming to the final pages of this journal and to the books I read in the last quarter of this year. I filmed some footage again of me setting up the pages, so it's a little bit nicer to look at something while I talk about the books. But I wanted to start the fall season by reading the Kingdom of the Wicked series, because the third and final book in this series was just released around September, and it also felt like a pretty good spooky book with some witches and fantasy aspects. The first book in the series was just okay for me, but the series really picked up with the second book in my opinion. I feel like the second book was all around the best of all three. The writing felt more cohesive, the characters and the plot became more interesting, and it really had similar vibes to A Court of Thorns and Roses and From Blood and Ash if you've read those books. After finishing the second one, I was so excited to start the third book, but for some reason I was slightly disappointed with it. I actually only got around halfway through the third one because I just started to get kind of bored with it and was so much more excited to start other books I had on my list. I wouldn't say this is a bad book, but there were just some plot twists that I didn't necessarily like, and it just didn't feel like the epic ending for this series I was hoping for. However, I still think that this is a good series to look into if you love the new adult fantasy romance genre. It has a very interesting world with the 7 deadly sins as the princes of the underworld, and it has a lot of spice, okay writing, and a glow-up story for the heroine. But next I read one of your spooky recommendations, which was The Retreat by Mark Edwards. I chose this simply because it happened to be in my Kindle Unlimited, and it also sounded like a spooky book right up my alley. I would say that this is more of a thriller murder mystery than a true horror book, but it definitely has some scary ghost vibes. However, this is the type of murder mystery where there isn't actually anything paranormal going on, so everything has a logical explanation in the end, which honestly is one of my favorite types of mysteries in the first place. I actually really enjoyed this one. It was a fast-paced and quick read for me. Nothing too special or outstanding, but exactly the type of book I was looking for the Halloween season. Then next I read another book that was recommended to me actually a few times, and I think I also saw Elizabeth from Plant-Based Bride recommend this in her spooky book recommendations video, and this was The Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer. Reading the reviews of this book, it seems like people either love it or hate it, and I definitely belong to the first category. I would say that this is a sci-fi or fantasy book with a clear horror and mystery of the unknown vibe. It reminded me a little bit of the TV series Lost, mixed with the Predator movies and just more creepiness. And I think it might be a bit slow-paced for some, but for me the mystery kept me so invested that I didn't mind it at all. I would say that if you pick this one up and still around 20 to 30% feel as if nothing has happened, it's probably not a book for you. This is also one that peels off only a few layers from the overall mystery and leaves everything pretty open-ended without a real conclusion. This series does have 2 more books, but the first one works as a standalone as well, and after reading the reviews, it seems like there isn't a full conclusion even in the following books in the series. However, this was definitely a book that made me think, and I know this is one that will stay with me long after reading it, and it was definitely one of the more unique reads of this whole year for me. But those were all the books I finished in the previous quarter. I've been quite busy in November and December and spent a pretty long time traveling to Finland to spend the holidays with my family, so I didn't have that much quiet reading time, but in the airplane back to Japan, I finally dove into the Six of Crows, which has been the most recommended book for me by far. This seems to be everyone's favorite, and we'll definitely talk about it more in the upcoming reading journal videos. And the new yearly setup is coming within the next few days, so stay tuned for that. I'm actually gonna continue the same journal because I have over half of it left, and I thought it'd be such a waste to start a new journal, and I also love this black leather cover, so I'm not really complaining. But I think that wraps up today's reading journal flip through. If this was your first time around here and you'd like to stay tuned for more, definitely consider subscribing. I hope you'll have an amazing day or night wherever you are, and a wonderful new year ahead, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye bye!